Welcome to the Rabbi and the Shrink. This is Dr. Margarita Guri, Dr. Red Shoe, and everyone's favorite rabbi,
Yonason Goldson.
And the good rabbi and I are really excited because today we have with us Lester Young Jr., and he is a guy with so much energy and so much to give. Hello, welcome, Lester.
Peace and blessings. Thank you all for inviting me to be on this episode of your podcast. I really appreciate this. Thank you.
Well, so do we. We feel blessed. As usual, it was a rabbi that found you. He's very good at finding talent. So you were on his radar. You must be doing something right. So Lester is a young man with a world of experience. He has a business called Redemption, Path to Redemption, Path and the number 2, Redemption. And his whole thing comes from his life experiences. I'll let him tell that story. But he has this idea of helping everyone find redemption. And he teaches, he speaks, he does a variety of things. He's become quite a world-class leader. So I'm just going to get right to it. Lester Young Jr., please, would you mind telling us how you got to Path to Redemption?
Oh, cool. Again, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to have an opportunity to speak with your audience today about my personal path to redemption. And it actually started in 1992 when I was sentenced to life in prison. I shot someone and eventually died over a drug dispute. I made some very, very bad choices early on in my life that unfortunately landed me in prison and someone ended up losing their life. And doing this, after me being sentenced to life in prison, I remember finding myself in a prison, like wondering, how did I get here? One, and how could I find some sense of peace inside of a prison environment that, that I may possibly die inside this prison system and never, the world will only know me as Lester Young, the one who killed someone. And I started really doing a really deep dive into that. I didn't want that to be a part of who I will always be remembered as, a person who killed someone. And that's it. That will be written in history as Lester Young. I didn't want that to be, because when we look at books and read books, people definitely change their lives and they add value to the life of other individuals. So my first 3 years in my incarceration, I was a little walking in a fog, basically, never couldn't understand how to find it. But they were like small nuggets and things that helped me get on this path. My first experience was with one of the chaplains at a prison that gave me a book by James Allen, As a Man Thinketh, So Is He. He asked me a very profound question, even when I think about it now. He was like, where do you see your life in the next 5 years? And my response, my immature response was, I see myself still in prison, possibly dying in prison. And he said that you are the master of your own fate. You control what happens to you by the decisions in which you make. And this is when he gave me this book by James Allen. And at this time I was reading at a 7th grade level of education. So reading, I didn't come from a family of readers. I hated reading. I felt like reading the most boringest thing that a person could do. He gave me the book and I did what I would do with any book. I'll put it on the shelf and just forget about it. But his persistent and consistent asking me the questions, have you read the book, forced me to pick the book up and started reading it. And this is where I discovered that my mind is the garden and I am the gardener of my own mind. The reason why I was sitting in prison is a result of me planting all the wrong seeds inside my mind that produces the reaction and the behavior choices that led me to prison. How do I change that? I had to see myself as a gardener, guard my mind by planting the right seeds in my mind. And that's when the seed of redemption was planted. And that's when I began this journey.
That's amazing.
Maybe we should just drop the mic right here. I mean, this is.
I know. I got goosies actually. I got little
really stunning.
Just
and
from that.
I focused in on 2 elements in your story, Lester. The first is free will. Mm-hmm. Is that we always have a choice to make, and the worst choice in the world will be followed by more choices.
Yeah.
And we don't have to let the past define us, and we don't have to give up on ourselves, because ultimately we are self-determining. That's the human condition. Yeah. And I can't change my condition, I can't change my surroundings. I can't change my environment necessarily. Someone pointed out to me not so long ago that the word responsibility comes from the word response. It's the way we respond to situations that is the hallmark of who we are or whom we will become. And there's a tremendous amount of inspiration in what you just described for us.
Very much. Hey, do you remember the chaplain's name?
Chaplain Scotland was his name. I can't never forget that guy because he was one of the first ones that really challenged me.
Are you still in touch with him?
He eventually passed away
Oh.
before he got out of prison. But it's
Did
just
he
like,
get to see who you become?
No, he didn't. But it's like I said, part of the respect to the people who helped me get to this journey is that I honor them by at least mentioning their names, right? And that was beginning of a long chain of mentors inside of a prison that began to help me. And see, I believe, like you're right, Rabbi, is that for me at 19 years old, I did not have the skill set to understand that, right? I did not have the skill set to understand because I wasn't trained or taught to understand that my response, I can change my environment by my response. I was just trained to this certain thinking. I call it the criminal thinking process, where my environment, the music I listened to, my peers, they just shaped this pessimistic, lowly person that will never accomplish anything. The only way you can accomplish or have any level of success is by criminal things, right? But when I started diving into different books that were focused on the mindset, I realized then that part of who I am is that, yes, we all self-determined and self-motivated as well, and our response shapes our environment. Once I got control of that, then that's when my life began pivoting in a different way. And here I am today as a result of me planting the right seeds to put me in a position, not just only to be free, but to understand that my role now as a human being is to be able to help empower someone else through my story as well.
And how long before, I mean, you were a baby when all this happened. How long before you realized you were a mentor?
It took me maybe 10 years into my prison environment. I was like in my 30s, because I was really focused on this period of time. Is one, as I mentioned to you early on in this, is that no one really prepared me for the level of guilt and grief that I will experience in my incarceration, because the reality still is that someone died as a result of my actions. And I had to find a medium, a place where I could find peace with that. And for years, I felt like the only way I could find peace is to deflect it. So I detach my emotions and feelings from it. And I tell people, like, one of the ways it helped me cope for a period is that I didn't want to mention his name, right? I didn't want to like even acknowledge him. When they said, why are you in prison? I say, they said I did this, because it was never about me. It was about someone else. And it helped me cope for a period of time. But as I hit this wall of grief, that was so overwhelming for me inside of prison that no one could help me. The only one that could actually help me overcome this level of grief was prayer, the power of prayer, and falling to my knees and begging God for some type of understanding. And how do I get over this? People would say, hey, get high in prison, do these different activities to help you escape. I didn't want to escape no more, right? Because I knew that my journey was going to be long in prison. And I've seen individuals who had done 20 years, and the result of them escaping it, they were damaged individuals in prison. I did not want it to be damaged in prison after 20 years. I wanted to be a vibrant person that found redemption in prison, that will be able to stand and give back something to someone else. So this is where when I said the prayer, I remember praying one night, and God guided me to speaking not to him, but to speak to the spirit of my victim. This is where I needed to make peace with, because I was like, God, forgive me, forgive me, forgive me, forgive me. But it was like a whisper. It's like, I have forgiven you. You have to seek forgiveness from the soul of the person in which you have taken off this earth. And I remember crying out and asking this person, his name is Gary Goldinger. And I say that with honor and respect now. Like I said, years ago, I never wanted to mention this person's name because it was a way of me coping. But to honor him in the life that I took is that I have to mention his name, because his name in that moment, that night, was the thing that shaped me to be the person I am today. Because I felt like he forgave me at that moment, but then there was a promise I made to his spirit, is that I will honor your life by doing the right thing. By honoring your life, I would honor it by living in a completely different way, that when your family hear about me or they see me, they will never dread the fact that you are free, but they would also celebrate my freedom because I've utilized a bad experience to turn it into something good, but it's going to be seeking to empower others, but also lift their brother, their uncle, their son's name up in a way of honor versus just tarnishing his name in a bad way. So that's where, again, it was that those moments like that was the transformative moments for me in my life incarcerated that put me in a position today where I'm living my life in a path to redemption because of the conversation God told me to have with my victim, who is Gary Golden.
And Gary's family,
Yeah.
have they seen what you're doing?
Yeah.
And what do they think?
You know, the power of forgiveness and the power of prayer. I remember years ago in prison, I would write in my journal letters of forgiveness to the family, but I never understood how this would change anything. But I just believed that one day God would put in their heart that forgiveness. As the years passed, God did place in the heart of every one of the immediate family members, a power of forgiveness there, right? So when I went up for parole, the family was not opposed to me being granted parole, the power of that. So even when I made parole, maybe a year after me being released, I went back to my hometown where the crime was committed to speak to young people about
Wow.
the choices. And one of his sisters was in the audience. So I'm speaking to this audience of young men about the power of choices and gun violence. And I saw it was something different about this woman that was standing in the audience because she was crying. I'm like, I'm not saying nothing that deep, and I'm speaking to young people. But after this talk was over, she came to me and she asked, could she speak to me? And then she told me who she was. And she said, could I give you a hug? And I was afraid of that, to be honest with you. I was like, is this going to be something harmful to me? But it's going back again that God placed in her genuine forgiveness that she hugged me and she said, you have made my brother proud today by honoring the way you speak. So she shared with me that story. And just to fast forward, even before her father, Gary's father, passed away, and this is one of the things I dislike about South Carolina and most of the parole systems, is that once you get out, I was on a lifetime parole. And being on a lifetime parole, you cannot have conversation with the victims, even if the victims want you to have that conversation. This is why I'm really big on restorative justice in a lot of these states. So Gary's father, unfortunately, died before we got a chance to have a conversation face to face. We had to go through different mediums to have like an indirect conversation about it, but he had extended that he wanted me to have a sit down with him about it. He forgave me. It was not about anger or anything. He just wanted to sit down and ask the question, what changed you? What happened that bring about change in your life? And I just share another point. Gary's younger brother, to this day, I am his mentor, right? I'm someone, this is crazy I won't say how it happens. This is the way God created it. I have messages from his brother that says that he feels that he's going through something now with his personal life. But he said, I feel like you, Lester, is the only person that could help me in this journey that I'm on because of where you at in your life. So it's see how things happen, how God bring things into our lives because of the inner works that you do in the power of prayer and faith, that here it is now, I have an opportunity by the grace of God to now help the youngest brother of Gary make better choices so that he doesn't travel down the path that myself and Gary traveled. So that's like the power of redemption for me. Wow. If I were to die today or tomorrow, I feel like I'm good with that because I'm doing something, at least giving back to his younger brother. To me,
Rabbi, that sounds biblical.
Oh my God, there's so many ways I'd love to go right now.
Oh yeah.
And I've never seen you get emotional like this during an interview, Dr.
I've never gotten emotional.
This is really quite powerful. But the holiest day of the year for Jews is Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And the sages say that if I've sinned against you, don't go to God. I can't ask God to forgive me for what I did to you. It's meaningless.
Wow.
But the first thing we have to do is to try to appease the people against whom we've trespassed. And you're showing something that is so deep and so spiritual that providence directs us in ways that are often very unpleasant. It's a combination of fate and choice. You made the choice to do what you did, but the circumstances were orchestrated for you. And then to come full circle to where you can actually use that failure and turn it into something beneficial, and not just beneficial to the world, but beneficial to the family against whom you acted. This is what redemption is really all about. And when you say that the South Carolina prevents families and their victims and perpetrators from meeting, I'm sure that was well-intentioned to protect the victims, but it becomes self-defeating. And we just had a story in the news recently here in St. Louis. A police officer had reached for her taser and pulled her gun and shot someone who, and didn't kill the person, but they brought these two people together, the officer and the person who'd been shot. They brought them together, and they discussed what happened. And the person who was shot chose not to press charges against the officer because they made their peace with one another. And when we can resolve our problems, then the justice system doesn't need to try to fix things for us because we've fixed our lives on our own.
Agreed.
Wow. Lester, all I can say is I know that Chaplain Scotland is so proud of you.
Yeah.
This much I know is true.
Appreciate it.
So you told a story. I heard you tell a story, Lester, about you were exposed to a mother whose son had been killed, and the impact that had on you.
Yeah. I was saying that, going back into that story that Friday night I didn't mention, but I actually was watching a show called Dateline on TV and saw a mother on Dateline screaming with this anguish that her son got killed. Very similar to the crime that I committed. And during this, and it was about that 3-year period for me where I was now trying to process grief. And I tell people that my grief was several. I lost my mother at age of 16 years old, which put me in a down spiral that made a lot of bad choices. I never processed that. So from 16 until 19, when I committed the crime, I was doing everything to escape that pain, right? So now here it is, I'm incarcerated. Now I have the process of guilt that I felt like my mom died mad at me because we had a disagreement the night before she died. I tortured myself for many years before and during my incarceration. And on top of that, now I'm dealing with the fact that Gary, the guy I shot and killed, is no longer on this earth, and dealing with that and the shame of killing someone, and then the shame that comes to my family. So I was processing a lot. So as I said, in that 3-year period of my incarceration, this is when I hit that wall. And watching Dateline one night, hearing a mother cry, for the first time, my ears are no longer numb to that cry. And I immediately connected that cry to Gary's family in the courtroom when I was sentenced for killing their brother. I did not initially hear that cry because I was so numb. But 3 years later, I heard that same anguish of a mother who lost her son. I immediately thought about Gary's family. And that again was the beginning of my heart changing from a level of cold-heartedness to a heart of empathy and sympathy, and also compassion to say, hey, what I have done, there's a need, I have to find a way to change that, because what I did at 19 years old is no justification for that. No matter how I try to rationalize, I was completely wrong in that situation. Even my response in the courtroom was wrong. What I mean by that, I chose not to even apologize to the family during the trial. I sat there in a very arrogant, egotistic way, just sitting there, not even thinking about the impact that this family is going to have to learn how to live without their brother ever again. So again, 3 years, when I heard that mother, my ears, my spirituality was at a higher level where I was able to hear it more. And that caused me to break down, and that began that process for me to say, you know what, God, forgive me. But God was like, no, you don't ask me, you ask this person, Gary, Spirit, to forgive you. And that's what that whole journey for me.
Well, that really resonated with me, and I wanted you to tell that story because we've mentioned a number of times that the E in ethics stands for empathy. And that when we cut ourselves off from feeling what others feel, then we can rationalize anything, we justify anything, we won't hold ourselves accountable. And you had that breakthrough to actually feel the impact of what you've done. And that was so integral to your own personal redemption. That developing a mindset where we recognize and we take responsibility for the impact our actions have on others is critical to being ethical and really essential to being a human being.
Agreed.
So I have a question now about how you do this, because a lot of people have insights and that yet they don't have the impact or that spark to help so many people. I want to understand about your transformation yourself for the spark to share that, and then how you came up with some of your topics, like the 5 stages of growth, the 4 stages of imprisonment, or whatever. So if you wouldn't mind speaking to that transformation.
Going back again to when you put yourself in a position to receive from God and everything else, God puts you in positions to receive. And here it is. This is 1996. I remember this. It's 1996. I was going through fasting and praying, going to the atonement process. After the encounter, that spiritual encounter with Gary's spirit and making amends with him, the next phase of that was me now beginning the cleansing process. And I don't know how it happened, but it happened. So I'm watching Oprah Winfrey show one day, and she had this show about gratitude, about the power of gratitude transform your life. And she spoke about journaling. And I watched that entire show. And as soon as that show was over, I was convinced that, going back into what you said, Rabbi, my response, I could no longer change my physical environment. The only way I could change is my response and how I see it. And how I was going to be able to see it differently is start writing down the things that I'm grateful for in spite of my circumstances. So after that Oprah show, I ran to the prison canteen and I got these notebooks, and I have some of them here. And I started journaling. Every morning I wake up, I write down 5 things I'm grateful for. Every night I will find 5 things that I'm grateful for inside of prison, right? And that began to create this layer. What I found were the 5 stages of my incarceration. The first stage of my incarceration, I mentioned my first 3 years, was what? Self-denial. I lived in denial of my crime, my action. And then within that first 3 years, I was an angry young man. I was angry. And the anger, I justified it for the external, but there was a lot of brokenness inwardly that I needed to heal from. And the third, which is called the victimization, I saw myself for the first 3 years of my incarceration a victim. And that's where I got like, oh, wow, this is different. This is something that I saw within a lot of the men that I spoke to in prison. They were in denial about their crime, their actions, the core beliefs or behaviors that affected their life. They was always angry at the prison environment and not knowing that it was not the environment, it was themselves. And then they all saw themselves as a victim versus taking complete ownership for the decisions. So once I made that connection, I began to see also where in prison, there were 2 levels to prison. There's a recriminalization level in prison where individuals sit in prison idle and they learn new ways of committing crime through talking to individuals, reading books, whatever, watching certain TV shows. You learn new ways of committing crime. But there was a decriminalization, which I believe there's 5 to 3% individuals incarcerated really travel this path. And this is where they begin to address their mindset, their behavior choices, and their response. And they shift into the last 2 stages of that, which is forgiveness. This is where a lot of my work started, is doing that interpersonal work of forgiveness. It's easy to ask God, but one of the hardest things that I had to do was to ask the victim to forgive me, the person I harmed to forgive me, and to understand that I had to move on from that. Also asking the family who I harmed to forgive me, forgiving those who harmed me. And lastly, learning to forgive myself, because I had to go back to the 16-year-old Lester to help him believe that it's okay, because I abandoned the 16-year-old Lester, if you understand that. I abandoned him and I needed to help him heal so that the adult Lester could be able to stand on a more stronger footing. And all of that was through just a process of journaling, watching that one Oprah show and then another show from there speaking about journaling. That's when I understood the power of transforming my life or the 5 stages of incarceration started from that one Oprah show. And that's when I started looking at it. I realized I had what I call now my book called The 5 Stages of Incarceration, because I started seeing it not only in myself, but in the lives of other men that were inside of the prison along with me.
Wow, that's powerful. So then how did you get to the point of being a public speaker? How did you make that happen, or how did that manifest?
Again, I because I was different. I was the guy that went to prison at with 7th grade level of education, who hated reading, became now a person who loves reading books, right? I started reading books, and people just started, in the prison environment, I started getting self-appointed to stop being a speaker. You know, God's like, hey, you got something to share. You're different from all of us. Tell us something. So I remember just standing on the prison yard, hosting classes on the prison yard. And classes consist of learning 5 words a day. You have an obligation to learn 5 words a week, which was easy. Making sure that you stay disciplined and writing your 5 gratitudes down in the morning and night, and changing your behavior. It started from just standing in the corner of a prison yard teaching a class, to now sitting inside of a prison chapel teaching 300 to 400 guys inside of a prison about what we're talking about right now, the 5 stages of incarceration. How do you find redemption inside of prison? How do you develop a level of empathy, a level of emotional intelligence in prison, so that you can transform your prison by your response to the prison, by seeing it as an opportunity for growth versus a place of punishment and doom, but it's an opportunity for you to become a better person.
Stepping forward into opportunity, into responsibility, it's truly heroic. And I think that it's an inspiration for all of us, because, in one form or another, a lot of us are living in prison. The prisons we create in our own minds, the prisons of our own circumstances, of our disadvantages, of our homes, of our psychological or physical issues. I mean, we all have limitations. And in Judaism, we say a list of blessings every morning to be grateful. And one of them is that God, blessed are you, God, who frees the bound or frees the imprisoned. And it's not just talking about people who are incarcerated. It's talking about all of us. We all have our limitations. And there's a way out for all of us. And the courage and the sense of responsibility that you've articulated here, it's a message that goes to an audience that's universal, not just inmates, not just former inmates. There's something for us all to learn from your story, Lester, and thank you.
I think it's amazing. I think you would do well speaking with just about any group I know. I've had the privilege of working with some very gifted global athletes who have disgraced themselves, and they could have used you, because the idea of the grace with which you address your responsibility and you walked into your own sense of power. Many of these people never accept responsibility. They blame people overreacting. It's not my fault. Even the ones who are never in jail, never really caught, just the suspicion, they never accept responsibility. And what I see you doing is giving this amazing demonstration. We call that in the Middle Ages, call it confession by demonstration. You're showing people how to live beautifully, because we all have things that we do wrong on the regular, really. And how do you move forward? I think it's just amazing. So then my next question is, what's next? You're a guy who does not stand still. What's your next adventure, sir?
I mean, outside of jumping out of a plane or going hiking, I'm looking at going into 2022 is really just honing more into my craft, my niche, and creating these various syllabus that for the 5 stages of incarceration, the 5 stages of growth, but also creating more of a re-entry component to help those that are currently inside of a prison be prepared in a realistic way. Because as I work with a population of individuals who are transitioning out of prison, they walk out of prison still with this unrealistic reality of what the world's going to be, right? And when they walk out of prison, it's almost like they're trying to make up for lost time. They walk out at 41 years old, but they're still thinking as a 19-year-old. To really give some real context to that your success is going to be based upon, one, that your rehabilitation must start the day you walk into prison. So my goal is to love to be able to get all of my books in the hands of those who are the first day they walk into prison, give them a handbook, not about the rules and regulation of prison, but the rules and regulations and how you find redemption inside of a prison system. And it's based, again, your response. Something I wasn't given. I wasn't given a book outside of the first book I was given from the chaplain on As a Man Thinketh. But when it comes from someone with a lived experience, how did another person who's serving life in prison survive prison? Not by learning how to create a prison knife, not learning how to fight in prison, but how to win that interpersonal war with yourself. That would be my next goal, is to be able to provide those resources for those individuals in the Department of Juvenile Justice, as well as adult prisons, so that they can be able to have a more wholesome life moving forward inside of prison and don't hit that wall of grief and guilt that even may cause them to commit suicide because it was so overwhelming for them.
Well, I have a request for you.
Okay.
My first teaching job for college was at Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary.
Yeah.
And I learned from these gentlemen so much.
Mhm.
And the one thing they were trying, that was a time when they were doing Scared Straight programs and stuff like that. So some of them were working on and picking my brain, and we were working a little bit together. I was a small part of it. I was a mini advisor, just in the back, right?
Mhm.
They were trying to find a way to help the families, siblings, children, aunts, uncles, mommy, poppy, all of that stuff, everybody, so that the experience would be a growth experience for everyone. And then when they came back, they would have a better reentry, but also then everyone would be, I forget the word in English, apoyar, lifted up. They would be lifted up. Can I ask you to do some programs for those people, the people all around the experience?
Yeah, I actually do like classes, virtual classes on Tuesday nights, coaching classes,
Good.
Especially for family. And also on my YouTube channel, I have like tips to how do you help your loved one acclimate back in.
I've seen your YouTube channel. It's really good.
Yeah, so it's really just helping families understand that it's not going to be like in prison. There's a 3-hour visit that you sit down and talk to your loved one, and after that you leave, and they may come back another 6 months and have another 3-hour visit. It's important that a family member, yes, that you want to see your loved one grow and you want to grow in this process, but know that your loved one is not going to be the same person on that 3-hour visit when they walk out of prison. So I share will help families better understand what that readjustment is going to look like for them. You know, how do you actually best serve your loved one after incarceration, and knowing that it's going to require some space and it's going to require conversations like this. So yes, I'll definitely continue to build and add to that. And
are you speaking to the individuals who design and run prisons as well?
I'm working on it. It's to be honest with you, Dr. Rachel, it's like our society, when they're talking about the outliners, those who have survived prison and wanting to give back to prison, it's almost like people are not really, they're kind of leery about that. Like I tell people here in South Carolina, I served 22 years in prison here. We look at it in the business model, right? I did 22 years in prison, and if we add up the cost of prison paid per year is maybe $40,000 to $50,000 a year, right? I did 22 years, and we're gonna round it off to $1.5 million, right? That the taxpayers invested in me to keep me housed in. But for some, I was able to find redemption, understand some stuff that the wardens or others don't understand, and how to help people bring about transformation, right? I walked out of prison. I've been out of here. Been out of prison now 7 years, received a pardon and all of this stuff in just 7 years, right? You would think that the individual who would call positive, negative, deviant behavior, the positive deviant behavior, someone who lived in the same environment, create another positive way out of that. You would think that a prison system would say, hey, we want to create a board, a council board of formerly incarcerated people who survived prison to help us address. But unfortunately, it's not set up that way, because some of the mindsets of the people in that authority position don't see it. That bothers me. That bothers me a great deal.
You know, it bothers me too, because these guys were working on something that I thought was brilliant. You know how there's conferences and conventions? Well, they have them for every group, including people who run and manage and design prisons.
Yeah.
I could see you being the keynote speaker, or if you know, to any of those groups,
yeah,
and do some breakout sessions and spark some of this amazing idea that you have about redemption. I have faith that they can be transformed with some of your little positive mojo.
I believe so. It's just a matter of it's like this, getting in the right rooms, right? It's about how do you get in the right rooms, make the right connections with it, and begin to build from there. I think that once I get into the right room, build that relationship.
Well, we've got a Muslim, a Catholic, and a Jew, and we're going to all pray on this. So I think we've got it covered. I can only imagine that good things will happen. And even if you're not the one that does it, maybe someone whose life you touched will end up doing that. I am just blown away. Wow. Rabbi, is this a good time for the word of the day?
Oh, I think it is. Because providentially, I came upon a word. It's dictionary.com's word of the day. So I'm borrowing it from them. And the word is allyship. Allyship. And we know what an ally is. And an ally is a partner or a collaborator. So allyship is the status or role of a person who advocates and actively works for the inclusion of a marginalized or politicized group in all areas of society, not as a member of that group, but in solidarity with its struggle and point of view and under its leadership. And I think that that is just a perfect word for our discussion today, because we should all be allies in this mission. We in Jewish synagogues, we divide the Torah into portions, and we read a portion each week, and we go through the entire Torah every year. And right now we're reading the narrative about Joseph. Joseph was imprisoned for a crime he did not commit. He was 12 years in prison, and his situation looked hopeless. And then in one day, he goes from being a prisoner to being king of the world.
Facts.
And, our inclination is, well, that's one of those Bible stories. That doesn't happen in real life. Yeah. Well, let me remind you about a gentleman by the name of Nelson Mandela.
And Lester Young.
Well, Nelson Mandela was 27 years in prison and came out and became president of a country. Changed the country, changed the attitude of the world. Yeah. And Lester, you took your experience, and what all these stories have in common is that those who were incarcerated did not give in to the hopelessness, the pointlessness, the frustration, the denial, the anger. Yeah. They didn't allow themselves to be recriminalized, but they took advantage of the opportunity to become decriminalized. And that requires a sense of allyship. I have to feel there are other people in the world who are going to let me break out. Who are going to let me redefine myself. That the world will not imprison me, but that ultimately I'm master of my own fate. And I may not be able to break out of the walls, but I can break out of the mental walls, the attitudinal walls. And if we become allies in that mission, then we really can change the world.
Oh man, that's heavy, man. Like when you mentioned Joseph and Nelson Mandela, those are like two mental pictures of people that I kept here, right? One, I always saw myself not as Joseph, but I was like, there was a part of it, like Joseph had this ability to interpret dreams, and from the Islamic perspective, I don't know what it says actually in the Torah, but it was saying that someone came into the environment and Joseph was able to translate the dreams for them, right? And they eventually left. And then the king had this troublesome dream, and the only one that could actually solve this dream was a man that was in prison. So I always tell individuals that I'm preparing myself that if there's anything in our community that may be a troublesome one day, that I want to be in a position in prison that if I would never get a parole, I will at least have a remedy to a problem that the governor of South Carolina may need, and it may be only with me. And I would use that story to say, this is how we have to live our life. And Nelson Mandela showed me how fortitude could get you through a level of incarceration. So I looked at those, Joseph, a man with purpose. God showed him a vision when he was a young person, got out, and not got out, but he was eventually put in a position to manifest that vision. Nelson Mandela the same way. So those are two individuals that I always look up to, even to this day, when it comes down to fortitude and persevering through life challenges. So great that you use those two examples.
Well, I'm glad you framed it that way, because the lesson that you really articulated is that whatever circumstance we find ourselves in is an opportunity. And that Joseph would never become king of Egypt if he hadn't been in prison. Nelson Mandela wouldn't have gained the national stature had he not been imprisoned. And whenever we find ourselves in situations where we feel trapped, we feel hemmed in, we feel held back, if we can reframe and say, this is preparation time for the moment when I'm released, from the moment when I can actually take this experience and turn it into something that I wouldn't have been able to had I not had to go through this experience. And you are a living, breathing example of that. And so, Lester, we're very grateful and inspired to have had you on. We hope you'll come back and join us again. And
Absolutely.
It's been a real pleasure and inspiration. And Doctor, do you have a last word for us?
Well, the last word is, again, thank you, Lester Young. I think that what you're doing is helping us with the basics of ethics, which is part of ethics is, what do I do that's going to make the world a better place? And the only way that that happens is by doing good things and doing things that are not so good, even terrible. Because if we're going to be living, these things happen. What we do with it is the basis of a stronger foundation and articulation of our own ethics individually, in families, in groups, nations, the world, etc. Yeah. And so I suggest that everyone do what Lester did, and what the rabbi and I do all the time, is to realize, where is it that I need to forgive myself or ask forgiveness of someone else or God? And what's the lesson in it? Have I become arrogant? Have I become so depressed that I just think that it doesn't matter? Have I forgotten how important I am in the world, that everyone needs everyone to contribute? So I'm asking for that. And then Sue has a wonderful comment for you, Lester. Great messaging. Amazing. What a turnaround. Thanks so much. Keep spreading the word. And Sue is not someone who goes on and on. So from Sue, that's an amazing compliment.
Thank you, sis. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
We are blessed indeed to have you. If the rabbi and I can help you, we're certainly always will keep you in our prayers. But if we can help you in any more concrete way, please do let us know. I'm eager to be of service and support you in your mission, whichever way you can.
I appreciate it. I appreciate that.
I think you'd be great. Well, everyone, this has been The Rabbi and the Shrink with Lester Young Jr., helping us with the idea of redemption and personal power that comes from accountability with grace, and forgiveness with moving forward. Everyone, take care. Thanks for joining us on The Rabbi and the Shrink.